So I have been sitting here for probably an hour trying to create this video and struggling and trying to get the script right until I recognized that I already wrote a blog about this topic. So I have the script already created and I am struggling for no reason. So let's just jump into it. How to make a podcast. If I can find the script on my blog site. Awesome. So, hey, my name is Craft. If we haven't met before, I love story and I love interacting with people. And out of that, I started a podcast called Coffee with Craft, which is all about having intentional conversation like you would with a friend over coffee with your friend, Craft. See what I did there? Anyway, today I want to talk to you about starting your own podcast and 3 steps that I believe are super important when it comes to starting your podcast. But first, I want to tell you about a really great way to launch your podcast if you're nervous about the back end of stuff. And if you're nervous about the back end of stuff, I really recommend that all you need is 2 things. The first thing you need is a Blue Yeti microphone. The Blue Yeti microphone costs around $120, and it is one of the best microphones that you could possibly buy. I firmly believe that. I'm not just saying that as like lip service or because there's a promotional link or nothing. There's nothing like that. Like, Blue Yeti's microphone is amazing. I'm using it to record this video right now. I have a Rode mic that I'm not using because I wanted to show you how great the Blue Yeti actually is for picking up amazing sound quality. And so I'm using the Blue Yeti microphone to record the audio for this podcast, and it only sets you back $120. And honestly, that's the only thing you really need to buy to start your podcast, because then all you're going to do is plug that Blue Yeti into your computer, and you're going to go to a website called Anchor.fm. Anchor.fm is how I launch my podcast, Coffee with Craft. And it is an amazing website dedicated to helping you launch your podcast on any podcasting platform. It's really, really great. And literally, guys, you get launched on Apple Podcasts, you get launched on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Castbox, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, like all these platforms that I didn't know about. And I actually have like 3 listeners on Stitcher, like, which is weird to me that I have 3 listeners on Stitcher, like crazy. But I do, right? And I wouldn't have those listeners if I had just chosen to upload to Spotify or if I had just chosen to upload to Apple Podcasts. But instead, because I used Anchor to publish it out to all platforms, I'm reaching people I never thought that I would reach. And that's really, really awesome. And that's a good feeling. And so, hey, those are the 2 behind the scenes steps before we get into the meat of this video. You really need to understand this. Hey, use Anchor.fm, great platform, and get yourself a Blue Yeti mic. Totally worth it in the long run. What do you need to start your podcast? Well, step number 1 is I would identify your focus. You see, when I started my podcast, I didn't have a focus. Coffee with Craft was birthed out of my life kind of being in turmoil and chaos. I was in a season where I had just left a job for an opportunity that didn't work out and had taken a new job and moved into an apartment and hated my life. Like I did. Life wasn't good for me for like a good 6 months. But here I was trying to figure it out, trying to get into a new space, trying to really step into something different. And so I pulled out my Blue Yeti microphone, which I had bought for a completely random reason, and I just hit record. I didn't have a focus, I didn't have a dream. I just didn't have that awesome tagline that Coffee with Craft is about having intentional conversations like you would with a friend over coffee with your friend Craft. I didn't have any of that. I just said, I'm going to record, which is fine. That's a great place to start if you need to start and you need to kick yourself into gear. Like, do that. But if you want to really succeed, then I want you to identify your focus, which is what I have spent doing over the past 2 years, and I'm really digging deep into in my 3rd year of podcasting, is identifying my focus. And now that I have that tagline, I also went and I created some awesome graphics by paying a graphic artist. I got her involved in this, and now I'm really going all in on my brand of what I want Coffee with Craft to be, because I've identified my focus. And identifying my focus came out of trial and error of recording my podcast, because I figured out the conversations I loved having that were meaningful to me. Some of those conversations involve talking about what happens when church hurts, because sometimes church hurts. How do we have reachable reconciliation between race and cultural barriers? How do we become paid speakers? How do you overcome hardships in your life? All those kinds of stories that I began telling, because the people I was interviewing really got into the crux of like, this is what I want my show to be about. Conversations that are meaningful and impactful and can help people push their lives forward. And so I identified my focus. And now I'm going all in on that focus for year 3. So that's what I want you to start doing. If you're looking to start a podcast, identify your focus. 2, I want you to batch record interviews. That's right. I want you to batch record interviews or episodes. Whatever your focus is, whatever story you are trying to tell with your podcast, I want you to record as many episodes as possible before your release date. That's what I'm working on right now, is getting as many episodes possible for my next season's release date of the podcast, because I don't want there to be any lull in release dates, because that's where I've struggled. My podcast has over 1,000 listens and has 50 really committed listeners to the show. But it could be so much more and could be so much better and could be much farther along if I had committed to creating content and batch recording and really putting in the time and effort. Because here's what's going to happen, guys. Life happens. Life gets in the way of everything, right? Like, you have a 9-to-5 job. You're not a full-time podcaster yet. You're just starting a hobby. Like, you have maybe a family. You have responsibilities. You have life that just happens and makes it difficult to get stuff done on time and makes it difficult to record and create content every night a week. That's okay. But put the time and effort in ahead of time to batch record and record interviews and get yourself ahead, because a consistent schedule matters. That's one thing I didn't really believe in at first, but now I really, really do, is that a consistent schedule of creating content matters. And the more content you put out, the more listeners you're going to attract, and the more opportunities you give those listeners to share your content and reach new people. So if you want your podcast to succeed, batch record, batch record, batch record. Record content on the front end and release on the back end. Set yourself deadlines, right? Like, set yourself deadlines of like, all the content has to be recorded by this date for release date on this date. Like, that is what you really, really have to do if you want to succeed. So first step, identify your focus. Second step, batch record. Step 3, and this step is gonna suck for some people, it's market like crazy. There's this innate thing that makes us feel icky when it comes to self-promoting. But here's the thing you have to understand. No one's gonna promote your stuff like you are. I want to say that again. No one's going to promote your stuff or care about your stuff like you are. If you are creating content, you should care about the content you're creating. If you're creating content and want it to succeed, you should want people to know about it and share that with as many people as possible. That's super important. And so, guys, market yourself like crazy. A few things I have done that I'll show on the screen here is I sometimes release quotes of episodes. Sometimes I release just clips on Instagram using an Adobe After Effects thing that I made. It's like a short little waveform file that shares a clip. Sometimes I just post the picture on Instagram of literally the Spotify or Apple podcast thing. I'm just like, hey, the podcast is out. Go check it out. I mark it that way. I also put my links on Facebook and Twitter and all kinds of stuff. That way it gets into the hands of as many people as possible in an easy, clickable format. I put the podcast link in my bio. Sometimes I promote it on like silly things I'm doing, like in my writing, in my blog. There's a way to embed from Anchor into my blog, and so I'm super happy about that. And so I just throw it at the end of my blog. Say, hey, my name's Eric. I have a podcast. I would love for you to check it out. Click it here. And I've gotten tons of listens that way. And I've even gained a few listeners because I put the podcast at the end of the blog. And so that is one thing I believe is super important. Market yourself like crazy, because no one's going to tell your story or care about your content like you will. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Remember, 3 steps if you want to really, really launch your podcast. Identify your focus, batch record like crazy, and market. All those things are important if you really, really want to create a meaningful podcast that's engaging for people and reaches more people. Because, guys, you have a story worth telling. You have a conversation worth having. You have a perspective worth bringing to the table. But no one's going to care about it like you are. So put in the effort. And if you put in the effort, people will listen. That's one thing I've been most surprised about in my podcasting journey that I didn't expect. When I released episode 1, that sucked, I got 100 listens that day. 100 listens that day it went out. Not because it was great, but because people cared about my perspective that I brought to the table. And people care about your perspective that you bring to the table. And so I really, really want you to hear that. People care about your perspective. And so share it. And don't be afraid to share yourself. Don't let insecurity win, because your podcast matters and the content you want to create matters. So identify that focus. Discover your story. Batch record, batch record, batch record. And market like crazy. And I'll see you guys next time. That was a bad transition. Maybe a little better. Round 3, rock!